Hello and welcome to the On the Game podcast with me, Matthew O'Dowd. On today's episode, we have Ben Wintour. Ben is an entrepreneur and founder of Steel Warriors, a London-based anti-knife crime charity. In 2020, he was listed by Forbes alongside Greta Thunberg in the 30 under 30 list and has been described by the BBC Worldwide as a person changing the world. Welcome to the podcast, Ben.
Hi, Matthew. Nice to see you.
So let's jump in with the first question. So part of the reason that I started this podcast is to demonstrate the power of sport as a vehicle for change. In your own words, how would you describe the power of sport and what it means to you and Steel Warriors?
It's a great question. I mean, generally, I think sport is a great way of setting goals, finding purpose, coming together as a community, making friends. There are so many benefits to it, but I think also great for not only your physical health, but your mental health too. Really can enable you to get into a better headspace. I think also it teaches you really helpful lessons, as we've seen in the Olympics as well, whether that's kind of learning how to win and learning how to lose as well, and how to fail. And I think these are all very helpful lessons that we can lean on, across our lives and in every element of our lives as well.
Yeah, I'm a strong believer that sport provides a really powerful foundation and giving people the life skills that they need to go on and succeed, which I'm sure is something that we'll cover on later in this podcast. So one thing, you're a founder of an anti-knife crime charity, but before we really delve into the story of your charity, who they are and what they do, I'd really love to just talk about knife crime and what are the current trends that we're seeing at the moment in the UK and London.
Yeah, so obviously knife crime is an issue that's unfortunately been around in London and in the UK for a long time. It's something that we're all, I think, quite aware of, just because of the levels of visibility that there are in the news. So actually there is a lot of awareness around the issue of knife crime. In the UK, I think in terms of the trends and the stats, there's been a 78% increase in knife crime levels over the last decade. We did see a particularly high spike over COVID, but actually this year, knife crime offences are up 4% on last year so far. And last year there were 50,000 knife crime offences in the UK. So it's a huge problem, and a problem that I suppose one of the insights of how significant the problem is drove our mission and our journey forwards, and that was the fact that the police take in a ton of knives off London streets every month. And I think we felt that was a really powerful, shocking and powerful fact that we could do something with, and melt down these knives and recycle them into outdoor gyms.
Yeah, 100%. I think as well, I interviewed a previous guest who used to be a school teacher, and he unfortunately had an incident where he had a 6-year-old who brought a knife into school and was kind of brandishing it around. I think, unfortunately, a lot of the knife crime also tends to be steered towards younger individuals, which is, also quite worrying. I think I've just got a stat here. So from 2012, a total of 34,845 young boys and girls have been detained by police relating to knife crime. And that's enough to sell out any one of 10 Premier League stadiums. So it's, something that's quite shocking when you really do start to look at the scale of the problem.
Yeah, I think understanding also what are the trends in terms of the people who do tend to carry knives. And I think there's a huge of those people who commit knife crime related offences, 80% of those were excluded from school. And I think that tells us a lot about where there's a need for intervention and how we can actually support people at a point in their life where, perhaps they take the path of turning to gangs as opposed to, getting a job. Maybe there are limited options available to people as soon as they come out of an exclusion. So how can we strengthen the support that we can offer young people at that point where they have the choice to go one way or the other? And how can we really help to nurture them and support them in a way that works for them, but enables them to go down a healthier track.
Yeah, and would you describe these people that end up getting involved in knife crime as vulnerable?
Definitely. Yeah, yeah. That's how we generally refer to the young people that we work with. You know, they're all vulnerable young people. They're at risk of often of being affected by the issue of knife crime in multiple ways. Obviously, we focus on potential victims being vulnerable ones, but actually, that is of course the case. But I think often the perpetrators of knife crime are really vulnerable people, and so and quite lost, at the point in life that they decide to go down that track. And so I think it's really important to help people find that community and find that guidance that so often young people will lack if they turn to issues of knife crime. And I think there is a correlation also between people who turn to knife crime and people who turn to extremism. Often it's a lack of a sense of belonging. And so, when you're in a vulnerable position where you don't have perhaps present parents or a good support system or a community around you, and you feel very alone, if you're welcomed by a group of people, regardless of what their aims and outcomes are, quite often you will be attracted to that sense of belonging. So I think for us it's really important to try to give people a healthy way of belonging in a positive community rather than going and turning to something that results in harm or preaches hate.
Yeah, and when we come to talking about intervention, which is a topic you mentioned a little bit there, what are the pitfalls that you often see in some of the campaigns that are aiming to tackle knife?
Well, I think one of the pitfalls I'd say is that quite a lot of campaigns focus on being seen to be doing good rather than actually thinking, how much impact are we having here? And I think sometimes it can be really, a lot of campaigns are simply a PR exercise. I think a lot of them are well meant, but I would just encourage people often creating campaigns to think, okay, tangibly, let's fall in love with the problem, not the solution. How can we really focus on what the issue is here and how we're making a difference, and really challenge ourselves to make a difference and test that we're making a difference, rather than thinking, oh, this is a really, nice airbrush campaign that makes us look great, and hopefully the general public will think we care about the issue. A huge amount of money is often spent on campaigns, and I think that quite often there's a real opportunity to spend that money in a way that can really deliver incredible and impactful results that will change big issues.
Yeah, and so I guess a question for you is, some of the campaigns that you see, they're big multimedia national campaigns that look aesthetically beautiful, although they're trying to solve a very real problem. Would you say that the campaigns should probably be more targeted to the specific vulnerable demographics of people, and therefore those kind of big mass multimedia campaigns probably need to change the way that the message is being delivered to reach that target demographic?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated, right? I think that there are lots of different people who are involved in resolving the issue of knife crime. So, whether that be speaking to general members of the public who can raise funding for organizations, or whether it's talking to young people directly, or whether it's talking to organizations that can support. So it really depends on the angle that you're taking with a campaign. But I think a good example of a campaign that I think have done a really excellent job are Don't Stop Your Future, Idris Elba's campaign that he's launched, because I think what I think makes that really impactful is the fact that they're not only raising awareness around, obviously, the issue of knife crime, but they're supporting a lot of organizations and raising money and mobilizing the general public to get behind their campaigns. And I think Idris Elba's really using his influence to make a difference. And I think now that there are a lot of the way that advertising and marketing has kind of changed and morphed over the last 10 years, has become much more personality led and influencer led. And I think there's a lot of young people look up to influencers and people with influence, and a lot of the general public also listen to them and want to get behind them too. So I think they're in a really unique position where they can help to shape not only the kind of attitudes of young people, but also the general public, and really generate
Yeah, and I feel one campaign that really stood out to me was Arsenal's No More Red. I don't know if you've seen that, but I think that's such a symbolic and striking campaign.
Yeah, so we actually we were involved a little bit in that campaign, the No More Red campaign, and yeah, I think it said a powerful message about raised a lot of awareness around the issue. I think what's most interesting about that campaign, kind of getting into that back into that influencer-led piece, is just the power of individuals. Footballers are kind of many icons of our time, and a lot of people look up to them. And I think if they're taking a stance on an issue like this, a lot of young people are likely to be affected by that stance too, and more likely to share their views on it.
Yeah, definitely. And when it comes to obviously the government stance on this and deterring knife crime, one of the things that we see is that they keep raising the sentences for carrying knives as a deterrent. Do you think that's effective, and kind of enough is being done to tackle the problem at its root?
So I think yes and no, in that I think data supports the fact that higher deterrences can be effective at deterring people from committing crimes. If we look at certain countries that are not necessarily countries that I think are doing everything right by any means, but there are certain countries where violent crime is close to nil, and they do have very, very serious sentences which do act as a significant deterrent, I think.
What countries would they be?
So I mean, if you look at Cuba, for example, or not that politically I would necessarily follow much of how Cuba is set up, but a lot of countries in the Middle East as well. I think that no country is perfect all through, but I think deterrence can often put people off committing crime. But I think that the second part of your question, are we doing enough? I think no. I don't think deterrence alone is right, because many people would probably say they don't have a choice but to turn to gangs when they come out of school and they don't have any qualifications. And they're unable, because they don't have any qualifications, to get a job, and a gang's going to let them in regardless of how many GCSEs they have. I think it's really important that there are more options available to people, to give them that choice and give them that opportunity to make money and to be part of a community. And so that's what we're trying to do a lot of.
Yeah, and so for people that don't know what Steel Warriors is, what you do, can you just expand on that for us?
So Steel Warriors was launched in 2017, and what we do is we take knives that come off the street, a ton a month, and we melt them down and we recycle them into free outdoor community gyms. We offer training sessions at our gyms for the community, and youth intervention programs, so that we can help young people get into fitness, and also ultimately try and help them get a job and PT qualified as well. And back to the point around kind of finding those vulnerable people at the point where they're at risk, that's what we really try and lean on, and trying to support people at the point where they might turn to gangs. But also, one of the reasons we build outdoor calisthenics gyms is to counteract against two of the motives for carrying a knife, one being protection, people not feeling safe walking the streets, and the other being bravado. So by providing a gym, we allow people to develop more physical confidence to walk the streets unarmed, and a healthy way of flexing muscles too. But I think one of the most powerful things about what we do is trying to kind of provide people with role models and a community of like-minded athletes and people who are also on their calisthenics journey to lean on and to provide support to people.
Yeah, when I first came across your organization, I really just love this concept of taking something that's so destructive and so violent, but transforming it into a pillar of the community that actually gives back and helps to combat this huge issue. Obviously, a lot of what you're doing is very community based. How do you get the buy-in of the community to make sure that they're taking advantage of these bar parks that you're making?
Well, I think calisthenics as a sport is a very accessible one. Um, for our training sessions, we don't ask people to book in advance. They can just roll up at the time of our sessions and get involved. So I think not having to book, not having to pay, I think helps in terms of accessibility. They can also not have to, they don't have to join the classes. They can just work out in the spaces if they want to. I think what's different about calisthenics, there's a really interesting kind of community feel that comes with a calisthenics gym. And there are a lot of people that are always trying to help each other. There's a lot more kind of interaction and talking and support that goes on. Sometimes, when I go to an indoor gym, I see kind of people with their headphones in, sitting in silence, waiting behind the other to use the bench press or any other piece of kit. Whereas in calisthenics, it's much more kind of, you see a lot of people clapping each other on and teaching each other tips. It unites people a lot more and has them kind of talking and making friends more easily. And I think that was something that we didn't really know when we launched the first gym. We didn't know how many people would make friends, how many people would interact, but it's so nice to see that so many people who've now been going for years to each of our gyms have made heaps of friends. And actually, regardless of whether people are directly affected by the issue of knife crime, there have been lots of people who've been that were really affected by loneliness at the end of COVID and poor mental health and feeling isolated in different ways. And it was really nice to see that, see those people develop friendships at each of the spaces and come together and, and every week now come back to the gyms. Quite often when I go, drop in on a Sunday or a Saturday, I see the same faces there who are there almost every evening. So it's really, really nice to see that.
And would you say it's a bit more of a melting pot? It brings people together from different backgrounds and ethnicities to enjoy and have an outlet.
Yeah, I think like a true community space is one that's not just reserved for one group of people or age or gender of people. It's one that's open to everyone. And so we've seen, to take our Canary Wharf or our gym near Canary Wharf as an example, there's a large Bengali population around Poplar, so we see them using the gym, and women in hijabs using the gym, as well as kids from the local school, office workers from Canary Wharf. It's a real, space where I think a lot of people feel a sense of kind of ownership of it. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about a community space, is really making sure that you're bringing everyone together. And I think that's happened quite naturally, which I think is a really nice thing.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing just from my perspective, when I've been looking across your socials, I would say the content that you produce is very reflective of the target audience and the people that you're trying to reach. I would say the tone of voice is very on point. It's very raw. It's kind of a little bit unpolished and quite gritty, which I think really actually hones in on what calisthenics is as a sport. But for people that don't know what calisthenics is, can you just explain that, please?
So calisthenics originated, well, I mean, it probably originated long before ancient Greece, but the word kalos, thenos, originated back then, and it's the idea of using your body weight for training. So even though it's a very accessible sport and a very inaccessible word, but it basically means using your own body weight. So press up is calisthenics, or sit ups are calisthenics. So we're all familiar with it to some extent. I mean, if we look at the Olympics, a lot of the gymnasts, well, they're probably the most extreme advanced form of calisthenics, right? So there are always ways that you can step up and progress in meeting your calisthenics goals. And I think that's one of the things that's really kind of attracted people, is there's always kind of a next step to your journey.
One of the things that I did and love is the bars documentary that you guys produce. I think there was a really powerful story, which I'd just love to get your opinion on. So one of the people in the video, he says, "I like to get involved in violence when I was younger. I like fighting. I like robbing people. This is the type of stuff that I like to do. basically I was a troublemaker for the fun of it, not because I had a troubled background, but because it was excitement to me. What do you think this tells us about the problem of knife crime?
So I think it tells us that bravado, back to that point around the motivation that young people have for carrying a knife, that it's not just necessarily a question of feeling safe, that it is to a lot of people who carry knives as a way of protecting themselves. There are problems in culture that have kind of celebrated this idea of, you get respect for carrying a weapon, or using a weapon. I mean, I think the glorification of violence is something that we need to try to change. I think that's one really, back to the influencer point. How can we use influential rappers to try to change the cultural dialogue and meaning of, what it means to carry a knife? But I think there are also things that we can do in terms of the knives that legally are accessible to people, glamorized knives with all sorts of kind of shapes and sizes, and Rambo knives that look like objects that people want to kind of show off with. And I think that there's a real problem with that. And a lot of the knives that we see coming in don't look just like knives that are, kitchen knives or basic knives that you would find in a shop. They look like knives that are used to demonstrate, I'm also, I want to be taken seriously.
Yeah, and I mean, when you, as you say, when you look at some of these knives, you can't help but look at them and think that they were designed for violence. There's no need for a machete or a zombie knife or a Rambo knife to be had in a regular day-to-day world.
Yeah, I think a lot of these companies that sell these kind of knives label them as hunting knives, but I would say that they should really think about who's buying their knives and what they're using them for. And there's one company in particular, Wrangler Arms, that supply frightening percentage of the knives that come in off the street. And so I think that tells us that enough isn't being done by certain companies to try and make sure that they're not, not ending up with us. I think that's a very interesting way of understanding who's not doing enough to prevent against the issue. What are they doing wrong that's leading to these knives getting into the hands of the wrong people? And so, I think we should work with the government actually to, maybe it's that organizations get fined if their knives are found to be collected by the police. There are definitely interesting ways that we could hold companies accountable for selling knives.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's a very interesting way of looking at the problem and being able to identify, as you say, the root causes and who's contributing to this. I think people do have to, and companies have to start taking responsibility at some point as well. Obviously, we know that knife crime is a big issue, but Still Warriors is helping to change that. Could you share some examples or a success story of how Still Warriors is positively impacting kind of individuals or communities?
Yeah, so I think it's been really nice getting a lot of feedback from users of our gyms, and quite recently we've launched a youth intervention program run by Lindsay on our team, but we've also had a lot of our coaches engaging with that, and it's been incredible to see some of the feedback from young people that we've had from that program, people that are very vulnerable and at risk, and didn't really know anything about calisthenics or engage in it, and feeling very engaged. Some people, there's one person who has an order where they're not able to leave their home between certain hours, and we managed to get permission for them to be able to attend one of our classes outside of those hours, and it was granted, and they've been attending our
Oh wow, that's amazing.
which is incredible, and really kind of the sessions really seem to be making a difference to a lot of the people who've been attending them. So I think there's always more that we could do, but I think we've had some really promising results from the people who've been attending our sessions, and we've heard some really interesting stories also about people who've met down at our spaces. There was one person or two people who met, and this guy whose brother was stabbed by someone. It turns out he'd made friends with the person who carried the knife. And they managed to put their differences aside and come together at the gym. And I thought that was a really powerful example of two people who'd have every reason to, hate each other coming together, and the power of sport. If we can bring those two people together, I think there's a huge amount of change that we can make. But I think that really taught us a lot about the power of the sport to make a difference, and the power of the community to let people put things aside. And we've heard a lot of people say, you'll never find hate in this community, and that this is kind of like, this is a safe space for everyone. I think that's such a nice thing to hear. And I don't think, we don't really feel like we need to police people being respectful to each other at the spaces. I think the community do that really well, and the community respect the space and see it as their own. And even that even extends to things like rubbish being dropped on the floor. People just clear it up and throw it away. We don't need to tell people to do that. And I think that tells us that people really see the gym as their own, and that's exactly how they should. So,
Yeah, no, I mean, well, that's just such an incredibly powerful story, and something that's, yeah, so amazing to hear. As a founder, if you just take kind of a step back, and you obviously founded this in 2017 to now achieving and hearing a story like that, how does it make you feel?
yeah, I mean, I think Pia and I co-founded Steel Warriors back then, and at that time we didn't know how much impact. It was all speculation, but we felt we had some valid assumptions that it would make a difference. And there is nothing that feels nicer than knowing that we are playing a role in preventing against this issue. And it's a complicated one, and we're definitely not the sole solution to it, but it is great knowing that we are part of the solution. And so many people across the charity, many of them have direct issues with knife crime, and some of them don't. And many of the people who helped build our first gym, it was built pro bono. People built it for free. Different organizations coming together: fabricators, ground workers, metallurgists, foundries, all sorts of people came together to rally around this vision and the problem and build the first gym. We had no money to build it at all. And I think that really, shows, even if you're a fabricator or you're an engineer who doesn't really know very much about the issue of knife crime but wants to make a difference, you can play a role to do that. And all of these companies created a huge amount of value and enabled us to get that first one off the ground. So I think lots of people can come together to get behind the problem in different ways. And I think that's what, it's really felt like a labour of love. Everyone really cares about this issue, and everyone really wants to make a difference. And so it's been amazing just seeing the amount of support from individuals and organisations getting behind it and wanting to create an impact.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing I'm just incredibly curious about is, how did you go about convincing the police to give you all of these confiscated knives? I can imagine that probably wasn't the easiest of processes to go through.
Well, I think part of it was luck in that I'd reached out to someone fairly early on who happened to be the right person, who was in a position to make decisions over the knives that are collected off London streets. And I think so that really helped, just that I'd managed to get through to the right person early on. Of course, there was a certain amount of due diligence that they had to do to make sure that we were, it was all done securely, and I'm sure they did a fair amount of background checks, etc. on it. What was really nice to see was, for an organization that's regarded sometimes to be quite red tapey, the police embracing innovation and being open to this idea of the possible benefit that could be generated outweighing the risks which they could mitigate against, was really, really great to see. Nice that they got behind it. And I definitely wouldn't reference the police being one of the organizations that slowed us down. I think they really helped us get to where we needed to get to. And obviously that was the one thing. They were the one organization who we absolutely, we really depended on in order to get this quantity of knives. And they helped us get there. So that was that was really, meant that we could get started.
Yeah, I mean, it must be also quite a humbling experience to see the sheer quantity of knives that you're given from the documentary as well. I can see that they're still in, some of them are still in evidence bags, and it must be just quite shocking to see that sheer quantity of knives.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I remember, the first time when they are feeling physically affected, just seeing the quantity of knives. The idea of it is one thing, but being there and actually seeing how many of them there are is a really, shocking thing to see. And one of the things that we do with our team and try and encourage is that everyone does go down and go to the where we store our knives and see all of the knives, because I think it makes it very real, the problem, and it makes you, I think, much more motivated as well to get behind it when you are up there and see them. We tried to avoid using knives that were used in evidence. Of course, the police take in all of the knives. But and that's really just for kind of sensitivity reasons. But at the moment we've had to pause on taking in steel simply because we've just got too much of it. We've got tons and tons of knives in storage, and we've always said that our ambition is to fail, in that, when we run out of knives to build gyms with, our job will be a success. But, at the moment, it feels like we're quite far from that, just given the quantity of knives that are coming in every month.
Yeah, 100%. It's such a shame that, obviously, yeah, just that quantity of knives. So we talked about disconnection earlier. One question that I really wanted to ask you was, we obviously live in a society where we're technologically more connected than ever, but probably socially more disconnected. How do you think this contributes, if at all, towards knife crime and the problems that you're trying to combat?
I think you're totally right. I mean, we're obviously more digitally connected than ever before, and I think that it's a blessing and a curse, in that I think balance is key. Content is the lifeblood that gets lots of young people coming down to our gyms. So in one sense, it's a great way of sharing with young people what we do and trying to engage them and get them to participate. And also the gymnastic side of the sport, where you see people flipping around on the bars, makes for great content, and a big part of that drives people to the spaces. So and now we see more people as fitness influencers monetizing it and getting jobs and being able to, fund themselves, which I think is a really good thing. But on the other side of the coin, there's, I think it can have a really negative impact on your mental health if you're constantly in your phone. And yeah, I think it's become a real problem. It's also been used to glamorize violence as well, often over social media. And so there are definitely issues with people not finding that balance, and screen time being very high. And we hope that, getting people out into the spaces and having a bit of fresh air is one way of bringing that down. But also, there are positives to it too.
As we talked about earlier, giving people a sense of belonging and feeling that they're included. I think, as we know, when people go looking for a sense of belonging, they don't necessarily find it in the right places. And we know that, for example, social media amplifies extremes. So if people are looking for a belonging, then they unfortunately get ushered towards these polarized views at times. But it's nice to see that, yeah, that Still Warriors is an integrated part of the community, but also helping to fill that gap for some people. I know you have a bar park in Brixton Prison. How did that come about? Because I think that's a really important part that we haven't necessarily talked about, is rehabilitation of people that have been down the wrong path?
Definitely. I think so. We do have this bar park in Brixton Prison, and actually a lot of the guys inside the prison help to get it up and manufacture it and do the groundworks and that sort of thing. So they played a role in also taking ownership and actually building the space as well. And so we're really glad that we do have that space inside Brixton Prison. I think we got it up just before COVID launched. Came out, and obviously we were unable to host sessions and that sort of thing within the space, and I think it slowed us down in really being able to as a charity integrate with that space and try and make a difference. It's something that we definitely want to do more of in the future. And so this year, like I said, we've been really focusing on more of the youth intervention side of Steel Warriors. The Brixton Prison gym is organically getting a lot of use, and we're really happy that it's there. But there's definitely more that we can do to integrate. But I think that there's something really exciting in the future that I'm sure we could do to try to help people from the prison then come and perhaps get employment at Steel Warriors and start their PT journey in prison, which would be great for.
Perfect. And now we're just going to move on to some questions that I ask all of the guests that come on this podcast. So who is someone in your life that inspires you, either past or present?
One person for me who stood out in the last few years is someone who's really, I really think is really very inspiring is a guy called Mark Jones, who is, I think, a 43-year-old gardener from Croydon who very sadly lost his brother to knife crime. He reached out to us. I'd love to raise some money for Steel Warriors. I'd love to get behind it. It means a lot to me. This is part of my journey, and I want to tribute. He said he wanted to tribute his brother, and so we, got behind him, and 22 Olympic triathlons in 7 days, whilst the 40-degree heat wave was on 2 summers ago. And I just thought, I don't think I've ever met someone as mentally resilient as Mark. Our long-term plan is to try to get a gym up in Croydon, which is his home, and where his family are from, and tribute that to his brother as well. And I don't think there's anyone more deserving than Mark. And so I think he's taught us a lot about, the disadvantages that you might have. And, he started running long distance running in his dad's workman boots. But despite the odds perhaps being against you, you can achieve amazing things.
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating story, and hopefully we can make that bar park in Croydon happen. So what is one piece of advice that you would like to share with us, whether it's a quote that you live by or something that you've heard or something that you kind of have come up with yourself?
So I think one thing that I'm really interested in at the moment is the power of working on yourself in the moment and not constantly looking, resting your happiness on achieving X, Y, and Z. And there's some really interesting statistics around, I think 90% of your long-term happiness is predicted not by the external world, but by the way your brain processes the world. Positivity plays a massive part in your success. And I think some people will be chasing the future constantly, but not focusing on themselves in the present. And by, working on your fitness and meditating and practicing gratitude and building out your support network, can have a massive impact on your positivity in the way that you approach the future. So I think my advice would be, look after yourself in the moment, appreciate what you have, meditate, work out, focus on yourself in the moment, and that will have a real impact on your ability to make change and to achieve the goals that you set yourself, because the positivity is much more important and much more of an influence on your success than or many other factors. So that would be my advice, I think.
Yeah, that's a lovely thought. I think a lot of people are not as kind to themselves as they are to other people. I think a lot of people are very self-critical. And I mean, something that I came across the other day, which I thought was really interesting, was from the swimmer Michael Phelps. He always had this really critical brain. He was obviously an incredible athlete, but he was always striving for more and he could never quite reach it. And every time, to try and correct this, every time he walked through a doorway, he would say a positive affirmation. Think about how many times you walk through a doorway in a day. If you say something nice about yourself or something positive, it has to kind of start sticking and translate, which I thought was a really, really nice thought.
I love the connection between like that physical space and actually completing an exercise, that every time you do that you've got to do. I think that's a really cool way of making sure that you can build a habit. But yeah, I think that habit creation is something within your control. You know, it's something, there is so much that is actually outside our control in life, you know, and I think a lot of us rest our happiness on, you know, getting that promotion or achieving X, Y, or Z. And much of it we can't control, but what we can control is how we, you know, waking up every day and making the bed and meditating or practicing gratitude or working out in a calisthenics gym, you know, an accessible space or in our room. You know, these are things that we can do that will rewire our brain into a more positive place. And by doing that, we can really, you know, the chances we have of achieving success are much, much higher.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was watching a podcast the other day with Chris Williamson, and he was talking about how we fall to the level of our processes. So as you're describing, it's those routines that we put in place to kind of regularly check in with ourselves and make sure that we're not necessarily achieving, but taking that time to look after ourselves, that's really what makes a difference. It's those habits that you form that give you the foundations to be able to, as you say, kind of go then forward and achieve.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, Ben, it's been amazing talking to you. But before you do go, how can people find you? How can they find Still Warriors? And more importantly, how can they donate?
Oh, well, thanks very much. And I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been great. And thank you for inviting me onto this podcast. In terms of learning more about Steel Warriors, so we're on Instagram. If you type in Steel Warriors, you'll find us. If you're not on Instagram, you can go and find us through our website. There are both links in our bio by Instagram to get to our website or to donate, and there are also links through our website to donate directly. So donation is a you know, every charity unfortunately requires that in order to keep operating, and we need to constantly fundraise. So be very grateful for your support there. But also, please, you know, come down and visit one of our spaces. Sessions will be running until November, 3 times a week at each of our gyms, our public gyms. So get down, and we'd love to have you along. You don't need to sign up. And I think that's a great way of actually understanding more about what we do and being part of our community.
Perfect. And your 3 locations are where for anyone that's interested?
So we've got one in Langdon Park in East London near Poplar. We've got one in Finsbury Park, North London, and one in Ruskin Park in Brixton.
So Ben, I hear that you have a very exciting new partnership coming up. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Sure. So we're super excited to have recently partnered with Gymshark. We've been having conversations for a little while and gearing up towards a partnership and trying to understand what a partnership might look like. I think one of the things that, you know, love Gymshark for is the fact that when we first connected, they had a real authentic and genuine curiosity about how they could make a difference, and how they could get behind us and how they could help us play a role in solving this issue. And so we kind of strategized and worked out a whole number of different ways. And one of the ways that we're working together is we're launching a co-branded collection. You know, there are a couple of t-shirts and a few other items that will be coming out later on in the year, but a really cool collection with all of the proceeds going to the charity. So public can buy those t-shirts and other items of clothing And we're really, really excited about that. We've also, to raise kind of awareness around the work that we do, Gymshark have included a Steel Warriors gym structure within their Regent Street flagship store. So we feel very
Amazing.
lucky to be in the store and give people the opportunity to try out our kit. And there are also ways to donate to the charity through the store. So that's a fantastic part of the partnership. And one of our long-term ambitions is to work with them to build a proper Steel Warriors gym. As the one in their stores are much smaller, kind of it's just really a couple of pieces of kit, but we're hoping to work together to build an indoor gym somewhere in the future, which is a big ambition.
That's amazing. I mean, in terms of kind of, it feels like a great fit. Gymshark was obviously built around, like, for the community, by the community. I think your gyms, as we alluded to earlier, were helped. The first one was helped to be built by so many people in the community, for the community. It's, yeah, it sounds like such an amazing partnership. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what the future holds for Steel Warriors, because if you think about how long you've been going, since 2017, you have 3 bar parks, you now have a partnership with Gymshark. It feels like it's only up from here. So I'm very excited for the future for you guys.
Oh, well, thanks so much. And, we're really pumped about the partnership too. And I think, they're all about obviously the gym and the gym to those who can't afford it, are parts like Steel Warriors, So I think it's really nice that they've kind of included us in that kind of, I guess, that subject of what is a gym, and brought us into the equation as the community outdoor gym that people can use, and they care a lot about the issue and making a difference. And they've also been offering us PT qualifications to hand out to young people who are doing a good job in their training. So I think that will make a really big difference as well.